Thank you. I've been given the controversial issue of settlements, but Andrew was very polite. When we talked about how long I ought to have to talk, he didn't say what one MC once told me. He said, "You can speak as long as you like. The audience is leaving in 20 minutes." So I appreciate the fact that I wasn't told that. I want to try and look at this issue as if an impartial international judge had to deal with it. And I should add a caveat: the ICJ are not impartial international judges. They're nominated by their governments and appointed by the UN General Assembly, and that ain't a court of law. But if theoretically there was an impartial international judge, how would he handle this issue? Let's see. Are Israeli settlements legal? I should also add a caveat. It's a story I heard about Soviet Russia. Somebody from the BBC wanted to interview the man in the street in Moscow. So he went up to him and said, "What do you think about East-West relations?" And the man said, "Well, according to Izvestia," and he repeated the whole communist jargon. BBC man was very annoyed. He said, "Well, I'll try again. What do you think about relations with the United States?" And the man this time took the whole Pravda and gave exactly the communist government position. So the BBC man said, "Excuse me, do you have any views of your own?" And the Russian man in the street hesitated for a moment and said, "Yes, I do, but I don't agree with them." So I'm not... So what I'll try and do is not give personal views, try and pretend to be an impartial international judge, which I'm not, and try and see how this issue would be handled. These are topics that I'll be dealing with. And I'll go on to the first topic. First of all, a judge should start off that a state, by the way, as an individual, can do anything unless it's prohibited. In the same way that an individual has to say, "I have a right to do something," we're free, unless there are prohibitions. And there are many prohibitions on what an individual can do, and there are many prohibitions on what a state can do. But the onus is somebody who wants to say, a state cannot do that. The onus is not on a state to say, "Yes, I have a right to do something." So my theoretical impartial judge would say, well, let's see, are there prohibitions on settlements in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank? And we'll look at it. What was the first thing he would look at? And I don't want to go into the very good international legal introductions you've received. Is there a treaty which prohibits it? And the answer is there's a Geneva Convention which deals with occupied territories, and it has an Article 49 which says, I hope we can find it here, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. So my impartial judge will say, well, is this binding on, is Israel a party to the 4th Geneva Convention? And the answer is yes. Israel signed and ratified the 4th Geneva Convention. Therefore, is Israel the occupying power? So what is it sovereign Israeli territory? It's not. It occupied it from Jordan. Therefore, you could deduce that it's the occupying power, and it's transferring its population into the territory. And this, in fact, is what the International Court of Justice, which is not a court of justice, decided. And I emphasize in yellow, concludes that the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, have been established in breach of international law. My impartial judge would then say, well, let's look at possible responses to this. And the principle is, yes, Israel is a party to the 4th Geneva Convention. Does it apply to this particular territory? To what territories does it apply? And here we look at Article 2 of the Geneva Convention. It shall apply, I'm looking at the second paragraph, to all cases of the partial or total occupation of the territory of a high contracting party. That means a state that is party to the Geneva Conventions. So here my judge will say, well, did Israel occupy the territory of a foreign state? If so, Article 49 applies to it. To which territory? Perhaps Jordan. Jordan, and we heard the explanation earlier, was not the sovereign of the West Bank. No Arab state recognized it as a sovereign of the West Bank. But furthermore, in 1988, Jordan unilaterally declared that it had no longer any claim to the West Bank. So clearly Israel is not occupying Jordanian territory, even according to the Jordanians themselves. But my judgment said, well, perhaps it's the state of a territory of a Palestinian state. It might be the future. We don't know what will happen. But to say now that it's 67, Israel occupied a Palestinian state which didn't exist, or nobody, and the Palestinians themselves don't know what their territory is. Israel is not occupying the territory of a foreign state. So for the fact that Israel is a party to the Geneva Convention, we accept. But this is not the territory. But, my judge said, but Israel applies the laws of occupation. And here Israel did something which I think is very wise. It was done by Shamgar, who was the Attorney General at the time. He said, look, we don't consider this to be occupied territory of a foreign state. Nevertheless, the population are not Israeli citizens. Therefore, they require protection. Israel will unilaterally grant them all the rights of people as if they were living in occupied territory. I think it was a very brave humanitarian step, which the world seems to ignore. So what did Israel say? Yes, it's not territory of an occupied state. Nevertheless, the people there have the rights, as if they were, which enables them to appeal to the Israeli High Court, to have all the protection, to have the International Red Cross present at their trials. All this we give, despite the fact that it's not the territory of a foreign state that we've occupied. Let's go back again and look at the actual text of Article 49. Has Israel transferred its population? People have moved voluntarily. Nobody's been deported, clearly. Nobody's been transferred. And we know there's some other clauses, means you take somebody and move him. Would it have been if somebody from Netherlands or Switzerland or any other country lived there, would that be a violation of international law? Nobody claims it. Only because they're Israeli citizens somehow becomes a crime? In other words, Article 49 does not cover this particular situation. And what is interesting is that the ICC is now, we'll be dealing with it later, trying to prosecute Israel for a war crime. Article 49 of the Geneva Conventions did not define it as a grave war crime. Why is this important? Because grave war crimes means that there's personal responsibility for committing a crime. Article 49 was not put in it. The states should not move their population to try and change it, but it's not a personal crime. And the Arab states were aware of this. So what do they do? There was a protocol to the Geneva Convention in 1977, which they added this as a grave war crime. Israel is not a party to it. It does not apply to Israel. They made it even stronger in the statute of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. They said, is transferring directly or indirectly? Because clearly the word indirectly was inserted just to try and catch Israel, and Israel is not a party to it. So I think by their trying to add it, they themselves are aware and in fact admitting the fact that it's not a grave war crime. It's not something that can be prosecuted by the states nor by an international tribunal. So my impartial judge, I think, would have to reach a conclusion, look, under treaty, this is not a violation of international law. But he would then come to the other point made by Professor Rosen earlier, this custom. Perhaps this violates human rights. Now let's look what human rights it could, if Israeli settlements had been put on the site of Arab villages and the Arab citizens had been evicted, I think this would have been a violation of human rights. Not a single settlement has caused eviction of an Arab, not a single settlement. They've all been built on land that nobody was living on. I think my judge would have to say, well, there's no violation of human rights. There's another Palestinian argument. Yes, but they violated the rights of the Palestinians to self-determination. This, I think, is a very strange argument. It means that if Jews live in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, there's no self-determination of the Palestinians. It must be completely free of any Jews. Again, somebody from Switzerland or Netherlands, maybe. This is a very strange version of self-determination. The fact that nearly 20% of the population of Israel are Arabs, does that deny the fact Israel's independence, its self-determination? But somehow, if Jews living there, that would mean a denial of self-determination. And finally, a point which I think is of interest. The Oslo Agreements have a clause in them which says that the settlements will not be within the jurisdiction of the PA. It has a further clause in it. It says the issue of the settlements will be discussed in final status. And a third clause says that Israel will be responsible for the security of the settlements. Now, why is this interesting? The Palestinians were aware that there were settlements. It appears in the Oslo Agreements. They signed it. But there were people under occupation. They were not. It was signed with an organization, the PLO, which sat in Tunis at the time. They weren't under occupation. They signed it because it gave tremendous achievements to the Palestinian people they had never had before. It was in their interest to sign it. And it was approved by the EU, by Russia, by the United States, and by the UN General Assembly, in which they didn't say that they liked settlements or they wanted them. It simply acknowledged the fact that there were settlements, and this would have to be part of the final status arrangements. And Israel, by the way, also agreed that we will negotiate it in the final status. So those Israelis say, no, we can't, we will negotiate it. But the Palestinians, represented by the PLO, which claimed to be the representative of the Palestinian people, accepted the fact that there were settlements, and this will be one of the final issues. Finally, is the settlement good for the peace process? This, of course, is a political question, and I'll come back to my Russian in the street who says everybody has his own opinion. I was asked to give a legal opinion here, and I think my theoretical impartial judge would come to the conclusion, look, I may not like it or like it, but they are not illegal under international law. Thank you very much.